I've always believed that the most dangerous things wear a smile. That evening, the smile came from across a granite kitchen island beneath soft pendant lighting and the scent of rosemary lamb. Catherine, my mother-in-law, lifted a tall, ornate glass toward me with both hands like it was a gift wrapped in sincerity. A special cocktail, she said, just for my favorite son-in-law. I thanked her with a quiet smile of my own, but something didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way her eyes flickered to the hallway before she spoke, or how her fingers trembled ever so slightly. Maybe it was the way she emphasized special. Whatever it was, instinct stirred just enough to stop me from drinking. So I didn't. I held the glass, nodded politely, and when no one was looking, I switched it with the one meant for her husband. Not out of malice, not to prove a point. Just to know. To know if that voice inside me had been right all along. 45 minutes later, as Gerald, my father-in-law, broke into a cold sweat and staggered toward the restroom, the answer arrived loud and clear. My name is Andrew Hale. I'm 34, a photographer, a husband, a son. And until that night, I still believed that kindness could change people. That if I worked hard enough, brought the good wine, wore the right shirt, smiled through enough dinners, they might see me for who I was, not what I wasn't. I was wrong. I never imagined that following my passion would be a declaration of war. But in Catherine and William Delacroix's world, where job titles open doors and resumes decide dinner invitations, being a photographer wasn't just disappointing. It was an insult to the legacy they spent decades constructing. I met Lauren, my wife, 6 years ago in a sunlit gallery downtown. She stood silently in front of one of my black and white portraits, tracing the edges of a snow-covered road in Iceland. We spoke about light silence and why some places feel like memories. She saw my work before she saw my job, but her parents only saw risk. William is a real estate investor who built his empire brick by brick. Catherine is a retired attorney with an Ivy League pedigree and a Rolodex full of powerful names. In their view, success wears a tie, signs contracts, and comes with a matching 401k. At Sunday dinners, William would lean across the table with his wine glass and ask, "So, Andrew, how's the photo thing?" Like I was still in high school with a hobby that hadn't outgrown its teenage dream. Every answer I gave felt like I was shrinking while their expectations loomed taller and colder. I tried everything to win their approval. I showed them my published spreads in national magazines, gifted them framed prints of award-winning landscapes, even brought up a commissioned shoot I did for a Fortune 500 CEO. But it never landed. Catherine would smile and nod politely, then turn to Lauren and ask, "When will he settle down into something more sustainable?" As if I were a season she hoped would pass. As if art was an indulgence, not a profession. I started to realize that in their eyes, I wasn't just the man their daughter married, I was a placeholder for someone better. The irony is my work is stable. It pays the bills, it's respected. I've traveled across 5 continents for my photography, told stories of refugees, glaciers, and newborn elephants. But none of that could compete with a corner office in their downtown tower. And slowly I began to understand it wasn't about what I did. It was about what I represented. I wasn't just Andrew. I was a challenge to the narrative they had written for Lauren since she was a child. The career, the husband, the lifestyle, the dynasty. That's when I stopped chasing their approval. Not out of resentment, but out of clarity. I realized that some people don't want to be convinced. They want to be obeyed. And when you don't fit the mold, they'll reshape the story to make you the villain. It was a painful truth, but a freeing one. And it set the stage for what came next. Because when the man who belittled my career ended up sick from the drink meant for me, the power began to shift. Quietly, uncomfortably, but undeniably. And with that shift came a question I couldn't ignore. What else had they been trying to rewrite in our lives without us even realizing? There's a kind of cruelty that never raises its voice. It wears pearls, speaks with perfect grammar, and knows exactly how to twist a compliment until it stings. Catherine was a master of this art. Her words were always dipped in sugar, but they landed like needles. "You're very talented, Andrew," she would say, eyes glinting with amusement. "You really should consider teaching one day. It's such a stable path for creative people." Translation: "You're not going anywhere with this. Or I saw your photo in that travel magazine." How exciting. Must be nice not to worry about retirement savings yet. On the surface, kindness. Underneath, condescension. At dinners, she would smile brightly as she asked Lauren to help her in the kitchen, always right when I began talking about a new exhibit or client. It wasn't an accident. It was a redirection. Her way of ensuring that any spotlight shining on me was dimmed. She never said I wasn't good enough. She just made sure it was understood. Manipulation doesn't always come in the form of yelling or ultimatums. Sometimes it looks like a warm plate of food and the phrase, "we're just concerned." But concern without trust is just control dressed up in manners. It's how people maintain power while pretending they're being polite. And the scariest part, it almost worked. For a while I questioned myself. Was I too sensitive, too defensive? Maybe I was overreacting. That's the brilliance of subtle manipulation. It makes you doubt your gut and second-guess your own clarity. Until you start shrinking in rooms you once stood tall in. That's how they win, not by force but by erosion. A slow, consistent wearing down of your confidence. But the night of the cocktail, the night Gerald drank what was meant for me, something shifted. It wasn't just a health scare. It was a moment of confirmation. That I hadn't imagined the tension, the sabotage, the slow undoing of who I was. It was real, and if they had gone that far to dim my light, what else were they willing to do? That thought led me down a path I didn't expect. A path where I stopped trying to be accepted and started uncovering the truth. And the first truth I stumbled onto was that Lauren's family had rewritten far more than just the story of our marriage. They had rewritten hers too. I kept the glass. The one Catherine handed me so warmly, with the film that shimmered just slightly under the light. I rinsed it, wrapped it in a clean towel, and placed it carefully in a padded camera case. I didn't tell Lauren. I didn't call anyone. I just sat with it quietly, like a question I wasn't ready to ask out loud. 2 days later, I reached out to a friend, Jason. We'd worked together years ago on a photo essay about urban addiction. He now ran a small toxicology lab near the riverfront. "Just tell me if there's anything in it," I said. "Personal reasons." He didn't push. 3 days passed in a fog. When he called back, his voice was quiet. "There's lorazepam in it," he said. "A decent amount. Not enough to kill. But definitely enough to sedate someone. Maybe even mess with their memory." I didn't know what scared me more, the result or how unsurprised I felt hearing it. Sometimes we already know the truth. We just don't want to face what happens next. The moment you ask one question, just one, you open a door that can never be closed. For me, that door was trust. Not just in Catherine, but in the stories I'd been telling myself to survive our Sunday dinners. The story that I was imagining it, that her smiles were sincere, that their concern was just concern. No, the story had cracks, and now I couldn't stop seeing them. And so I began to look deeper. Prescription records, small-town rumors, friends of friends who once attended country club luncheons and whispered about Catherine's episodes. A neighbor who'd once accused her of stealing jewelry during a dinner party and then quietly retracted the claim. A pharmacist who remembered her picking up the same sedative prescription from 3 different clinics. I started connecting the dots. And the image that formed was more disturbing than I expected. Because it wasn't just about me. It was about a pattern of manipulation disguised as concern, of hostility hidden behind charm. And worst of all, a willingness to poison not just a drink, but a reputation, a marriage, a life. The question no longer was, did she do it? Now it was, what else has she done? And more frightening than Catherine's actions was the possibility that Lauren didn't know who her mother really was. But she wasn't the only one. There was someone else in that family who had seen this before, someone who had kept quiet far too long. Her name was Vanessa, and she was about to show me that I wasn't the first target. Families, when they want to, can tell very compelling stories. Stories about who belongs, who doesn't. About who's successful and who's a disappointment. And the most dangerous part, they often believe their own stories long before anyone else does. Catherine and William had built a narrative around Lauren since she was a child. She was the golden daughter, the one who'd carry the family name forward not by legacy but by image. Ivy League, marry a man with a title, host perfect dinner parties, have children who went to the same prep schools they did. It was all scripted, though no one ever admitted it aloud. And when I entered the picture camera slung over my shoulder, freelance contract in my inbox, I didn't fit the frame. So they adjusted the story. I wasn't her partner, I was a phase, a creative fling, someone she would eventually outgrow. They didn't say it to our faces, of course. They said it in between lines, in conversations with friends, in introductions at fundraisers. This is Andrew. He takes wonderful pictures, not a husband, not a builder of a life with their daughter, just a guy with a camera. At first I tried to correct it, tried to prove my worth through portfolios, published pieces, polite conversations. But the story had already been written, and I had no control over its chapters. Then one day by chance I heard the same script being whispered about someone else, Thomas. A name Lauren never brought up much, but one I remembered from an old photo album tucked away in a moving box. He was the man Lauren had once been engaged to before me. A doctor. Steady. Sharp. Everything her parents wanted. But he disappeared from the family timeline without a trace. No one ever mentioned him. It was like he never existed. Until I started asking around. And what I found was eerily familiar. Old college friends told me the story. Lauren had broken it off, suddenly convinced Thomas had been unfaithful. Her parents had shown her proof texts, bank statements, even photos. Thomas denied it all, said it was a setup. But by then, trust was already broken. Sound familiar? That was the moment I realized this wasn't about me at all. This was a system, a quiet machine. One that had been running for years, filtering people out of Lauren's life if they didn't match the approved image. Not by force, by narrative, by planting the right doubt at the right time with just enough concern to seem like love. And if they'd done it to Tom, if they'd done it to me, then who else? That's when I got a call from Vanessa, and what she had to say would break that story wide open. When Vanessa called, her voice shook not with fear, but with something older, more brittle. Exhaustion, maybe, or the quiet strength of someone who had kept a truth buried for too long. I saw what happened at dinner, she said, and I think it's time you knew you're not the first. Vanessa is Owen's wife, Lauren's sister-in-law. She'd always been kind, a little reserved, someone who smiled more with her eyes than her mouth. I never thought much about her relationship with Catherine and William. But as we sat across from each other in a quiet cafe that afternoon, her story unraveled like a thread that had been pulled for years. They tried to break us up, she said softly. Right after the engagement. Said I was too emotional, too private, that I wouldn't fit into the family. At first she thought it was just overprotectiveness. Then came the subtle sabotage, misunderstandings twisted into drama, private conversations shared out of context, little lies passed as truths. They told Owen I was unstable, she said, that I was hiding something. And when I started to question them, everything got worse. Her mistake, she said, was trying to play nice, to keep the peace, to smile through it all. Until one day I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. That was when she installed the security cameras. Not for evidence, at least not at first, but for peace of mind. For a sense of safety in a house that had started to feel like enemy ground. And it was those cameras that had recorded what happened the night of Catherine's birthday dinner. The footage that showed her slipping something into a drink. The panic in her eyes when Gerald drank it instead. The screaming match that followed behind closed doors. This isn't the first time Catherine Gerald had shouted. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Vanessa had watched the footage over and over. Debated for weeks whether to share it. "I didn't want to be the one to tear the family apart," she said. But then I realized they'd already done that. Quietly, strategically, one person at a time. Her hands trembled as she passed me a USB drive. "Don't let them rewrite you," she whispered. And I knew in that moment this wasn't just about me or Thomas or even Lauren. It was about every person who had ever been reshaped, erased, or quietly pushed out of that family's story. It was time to stop playing roles in their narrative. It was time to tell the truth. Out loud. And for that I needed one more conversation. With the man who had stood silently beside Catherine through it all. William Delacroix. I invited William to meet me alone. No Lauren, no Catherine. Just the two of us in the quiet corner of his country club's library, surrounded by leather-bound books and oil paintings of men who looked just like him. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a thin smile, the kind that says, "Let's be civil, but don't get too comfortable." "I heard you've been asking questions," he said, pouring himself a bourbon. "Vanessa's always been sensitive. And well, you've always had a flair for drama." He said it like it was a compliment. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even sit. I took out the USB drive Vanessa gave me and slid it across the table. "You should watch this," I said quietly, "before we continue." He didn't touch it. "You're not the first to try and question our family," he replied, eyes narrowing. "And you won't be the last." That's when I knew he didn't need to see the footage, because he already knew what was on it. People like William don't lose sleep over truth. They lose sleep over exposure. So I changed the conversation. "This isn't about power anymore," I said. "This is about Lauren, and what kind of story she gets to believe about her life. Because the one you and Catherine have been writing for her, it's not just fiction, it's poison." He scoffed. "She'll never choose you over her own blood." I smiled for the first time. "Then maybe you should hear it from her." That weekend I invited Owen and Vanessa over for dinner. I told Lauren I had something to show everyone. And for the first time in this long tangled story, I didn't hide what I'd found. I didn't water it down or ask for permission. I projected the footage onto our living room wall. Vanessa held Owen's hand. Lauren sat frozen, her eyes locked on the screen as the events of that night and years of manipulation played out in full. And when it ended, there was no explosion. No shouting. Just silence. A long, trembling silence. Until Lauren whispered, "Why didn't I see it sooner?" And that was the moment everything began to shift. Not with rage, but with clarity, because the most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to write you out of your own life is pick up the pen. And with Lauren finally seeing the full picture, we were ready to write the next chapter. One they couldn't control. Loving someone should feel like building something together, not tearing away from something else. But for Lauren and me, love always came with shadows. Not from within us, but around us. From the people who were supposed to cheer us on, not question every step we took together. After the footage was shown, something in Lauren broke quietly. Not in anger, but in grief. She had spent her whole life trusting her parents' compass. And now that compass was pointing toward a truth she didn't want to believe. They had tried to shape her life to fit their comfort, not her happiness. We didn't fight. We didn't scream. Instead, we sat on the porch one evening wrapped in silence. "What if they're right?" she whispered. "What if I don't know how to choose?" I took her hand. "You just did," I said. "Here's the truth. Love without permission is exhausting. It demands strength that often goes unrecognized. It means holding on to someone not because it's easy, but because it's real. It's choosing your partner over the noise again and again, even when your heart still wants to be a daughter or a son that makes your parents proud. But loving against expectation isn't rebellion, it's courage. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose the life you want, even if it disappoints the people who raised you." In the weeks that followed, Lauren didn't cut ties with her parents, but she did start setting boundaries. She began therapy. She reached out to friends she'd lost touch with. She stopped explaining us to them and started defending us to herself. And one morning, over coffee and quiet music, she looked at me and said, "I want us to be the kind of parents who never make our child feel like they have to choose." That was the moment I knew we were no longer trying to survive their narrative. We were writing our own. And then came the news that changed everything. A child. Ours. When Lauren told me she was pregnant, we didn't cry. We just sat there in the early light of morning, hands clasped over her stomach, hearts full and steady. It felt like the world had gone quiet, not in fear, but in a kind of stillness I hadn't known in years. We were no longer fighting for space in someone else's story. We were building our own from the ground up. News travels fast in families like hers. Catherine and William sent a letter, typed and formal, congratulating us and offering to assist financially. A week later, we received a certified envelope from William's attorney, the deed to our home transferred in our name. No strings, no conditions, just handed over. On paper, it was a gift. But I knew what it really was: a white flag, not an apology, not love, just recognition. A quiet, reluctant bow to the fact that we had survived their expectations, and that was enough. Sometimes people expect revenge to be loud, explosive, final, but the most powerful revenge is peace. It's waking up next to the person you love, knowing you didn't compromise who you were to stay. It's holding your child and knowing they'll never inherit the weight of someone else's control. It's living well, not to prove them wrong, but to remind yourself you were always right to begin with. Lauren still struggled. She'd go quiet on holidays. She missed the idea of the family she thought she had. But slowly she started replacing obligation with clarity. She understood now peace wasn't given by others. It was claimed and protected. Our daughter Eliza was born in summer, quiet and wide-eyed, like she already knew this world was complicated. When Catherine and William came to visit, they brought flowers, a silver rattle, and stayed exactly 20 minutes. No advice, no pressure, just carefully measured presence. We didn't need more than that, because we had already won, not by fighting, but by choosing peace over chaos, truth over control, love over loyalty to those who had betrayed it. And as we settled into this new chapter, there was only one thing left to do: close the door on the past and open the gallery that had waited for years to be born. The grand opening of the gallery was quiet, elegant, just the way I'd dreamed it. Framed moments lined the walls: a snow leopard mid-leap, a fisherman at dawn, Lauren holding Eliza beneath a golden maple tree. Every image was a chapter of the life I had chosen, not inherited. People came and went, some familiar, some new. Catherine and William even stopped by distant civil. William shook my hand. Catherine kissed Eliza's cheek. No criticisms, no manipulation, just a polite nod, and then they left. They hadn't changed, but we had, because legacy isn't just about passing down wealth or property. It's about what we protect, what we choose to preserve for the next generation. And in that sense, Lauren and I had created a new inheritance. One built not on control, but on trust. Not on image, but on truth. As we locked the doors that night and walked home under the stars, I held Lauren's hand and thought about everything we'd endured, how far we'd come simply by refusing to be reshaped. We hadn't won by shouting louder. We'd won by standing still, by staying whole. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real story worth telling. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever had to fight for your place, your peace, or your truth, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below, share your thoughts or your story. We read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe to 365 Companion Stories, where we tell stories not just to entertain, but to remind you you're not alone. Your voice matters, and your truth deserves to be heard. See you in the next story.